When we allow ourselves to be open and to be honest and to be vulnerable with ourselves, we begin to broadcast a frequency that we trust our higher self, we trust in our own power as the main source of creation in our lives. And we trust the universe and everything that it's reflecting back to us through our physical experience. And when we start to broadcast this frequency, things begin to manifest in alignment with our true will and our ultimate benefit in a much smoother and much more effortless way than they were before. Because maybe before we were very convinced that being strong meant actually disowning our vulnerabilities. How many of us have put on a mask or, basically put on an act to the world that, let's say, for instance, we're confident and we wear this mask of confidence in the workplace during our social interactions and friendships and stuff like that. But on a deeper level, we're actually experiencing a lot of insecurity. Maybe we go home and we replay the conversations that we had with people wearing that mask of confidence over and over and over again in our head, wondering if we sounded stupid, wondering if what we said was appropriate, for example. And I know I have done this many times in my life to where, I was kind of projecting myself to be this confident person, but deep down I felt very insecure, and I would replay these conversations that I had with other people inside of my head over and over and over again, hyper analyzing all the little details of that conversation because deep down I felt like I wasn't good enough. And although I was kind of falsely broadcasting this image of confidence, I was more so broadcasting on a subconscious, unconscious level these different insecurities that I was basically using that mask, using this image that I was creating to bypass and try to avoid. I didn't want people to see those parts of myself, those parts of my shadow, because I also did not want to admit that they were there. I also did not want to take full ownership of them. But when I started being open, when I started being vulnerable with myself, and when I stopped caring as much what other people think, my life began to shift in a major way. And I started to realize that I'm the creator of everything that is happening in my reality, and even the negative experiences are 100% meant to serve me and are 100% my own creation. Even if my ego consciousness maybe doesn't want a certain conflict or a certain falling out to happen or whatever it is, on a deeper unconscious level, I started to understand, or let me reword that, on a deeper unconscious level, I was creating the experience and I began to consciously understand this. And I began to keep embracing these vulnerabilities and to keep being honest with myself. In our today's time, we're heavily conditioned to avoid these more so negative emotions that are in connection with these parts of us that are burdened by trauma. We put on a mask, we create an identity, a belief system. We even create physical life experiences that mirror the mask. And, this can come through friendships, this can come through our work, this can come in many different ways, but we create a reality, internal and external to us, all in order to avoid what's going on inside. And we are broadcasting this frequency that is not in alignment with our highest evolutionary path, and it's not in alignment with our authenticity, personal truth, and who we really are. And because of that, on an unconscious level, we're going to manifest a lot more resistance from the universe because we're doing that. We can even say on a higher self level, higher self to human self, we're doing that to make us aware of what we're in resistance to within ourselves. And that resistance is just externalizing itself so we can have a hands-on learning experience with however that resistance is manifesting, and we can take the time to reflect on how we are creating our reality. And if we've created a very rigid shell around ourselves to avoid our vulnerability, well, we're going to keep manifesting a resistance because the rigid shell is never who we were. This is what I like to call the false self. But our true self has the ability to be open, has the ability to be vulnerable, has the ability to not give a fuck what other people think about our so-called weaknesses, because our true self understands that it's actually within those shadows and within those weaknesses where our true power is existing. And it may be dormant, we may not be accessing it. And this goes back to vulnerability. When we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, we start actually perceiving and extracting the light from our own shadows. When we start to be vulnerable with ourselves and we start taking a look at these different parts of us that are often going to be wounded or let me say burdened with early childhood wounds, this is when the layers that we created over that trauma to survive it, they start to dissolve. And this is the difficult part because this is when that trauma that we've been bottling away begins to come to the surface. But this is a good thing because it gives us the ability to start feeling through the emotions associated with that trauma so we can release it from our body, and then the universe is not going to have to reflect back to us that trauma and that internal resistance to it as much. But because now we are aware of it. Now we are also actually realizing that the trauma and the themes that created those traumas in our system, let's say it was like abuse with a parent or something like that, on a higher self level, we actually chose to experience that trauma with that parental figure in order to one day actually be able to extract the light from that shadow aspect of ourself. So maybe this trauma causes some type of disharmony in our system that we perceive to be a weakness, but there's going to be a polarity to what we're perceiving to be a weakness. And when we're vulnerable with the part of us that's carrying that weakness, we realize that it was actually a strength the whole entire time. And on a higher self level, we chose to simulate a reality where we were born into a certain family to go through that trauma with parental figures or a parental figure in order to have our system react in a certain way to where this shadow part of ourself was now existing. And we did all of this to one day extract the light from that shadow aspect of the self. And now this shadow aspect of the self, rather than running our system unconsciously and creating manifestations in our life that are undesirable, now we've integrated that shadow aspect to move in harmony with the whole of what we are. And that is our higher self. That is the source energy consciousness that creates all things. But to get to this point, you have to allow yourself to be vulnerable with yourself. You have to own these different traumas that are in your system. You have to own these different shadow aspects of your own psyche without judging them and without wanting to banish them away as if there's something bad. Because once again, the other polarity to that shadow part is always going to be something positive. It's always going to be a strength. It's always going to be something that you chose to experience, or something that you're holding that is actually in alignment with your highest evolutionary benefit. So even these different traumas that you've been through in your life are not a bad thing. They're not something that's wrong. They're not something that's evil. There's something that you have chose to explore before you even incarnated into the physical body that your soul is now occupying right now. Everything that you have ever experienced is by a higher design. And when you open yourself up to being vulnerable with these shadow aspects of your psyche, the paradox is you're now also merging with your higher self. You're merging with the architect of everything in your reality, and you're realizing that you are this higher self. But it's going to take being open, it's going to take being vulnerable, and it's going to take being okay with being very uncomfortable at times. Because once again, as you're being open and you're being vulnerable with yourself, and you're no longer feeding these rigid constructs inside of your psyche that you created to avoid your trauma, now these different constructs and layers that you built to show you away from it are dissolving, and that trauma is now coming to the surface. And this is your opportunity to be open, to be honest with yourself, and to feel through all of the different emotions that are coming up. And as you're feeling, this is where the deeper healing is taking place, and the signal and the frequency that you're broadcasting to the universe now changes, and therefore your life will begin to completely shift. That doesn't mean it's going to happen overnight, but I promise you, if you embrace this process, if you start processing your emotions and allying with them, and if you start being vulnerable rather than running away from these different insecurities and fears that you have, rather than running away from your wounded inner child parts, your life is going to change.